After giving up his life to become a leader for Israel, Moses seemingly disobeys God one time in Numbers chapter 20. He beats the rock instead of speaking to it as God commanded. God tells Moses that 1, he will not enter Canaan because of this, and 2, Aaron will die. He tells him he's not gonna go to Canaan in verse 12, and then he says that Aaron's gonna die in verse 23 through 29. Being gathered to his people, that's like an antiquated way to say he's going to die, he's going to be with his ancestors. So this doesn't seem like enough of a reason to permanently punish Moses in comparison with his sacrifices. The sacrifices that he has made: 1, he had to get his brother involved. 2 of Aaron's sons died in Leviticus chapter 10, which would not have happened if Aaron didn't have to get involved. But in Exodus, Moses was not confident enough. Maybe I should just show this. Exodus chapter 4. And so he kept saying to God, like, they're not going to believe me. And then he goes, I'm not eloquent. And so God says, okay, well, have Aaron help you with doing this. So when you look at Leviticus chapter 10, 2 of Aaron's sons died. Both of his wives are not mentioned after Numbers chapter 12. And it doesn't specifically state what happened. The last time his 2 sons were mentioned was in Exodus chapter 18. Along with their 2 sons. Those are Aaron's sons. Those are Moses' sons. So the last time you hear him with a woman was in Numbers chapter 12 when Miriam was struck leprous. It's the last time you heard of him with a woman. So he does say in Deuteronomy chapter 8, Deuteronomy chapter 28, because Deuteronomy chapter 28, this is the chapter that I'm on now, and Moses is talking to the second generation of Israel out of Egypt, and he's telling them all the things that will happen if you don't obey God's laws. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 61, he alludes to there's information that isn't recorded in the book, that isn't recorded in what we're reading. So there's additional information. He alludes to that in Deuteronomy chapter 28, but I take that with a grain of salt after reading some of this other stuff. Okay. So he gave up his opportunity to live as an Egyptian, to follow God's command. He got his brother involved, and 2 of his nephews died. His wives are no longer mentioned. His sons are no longer mentioned. And then another thing that affected Moses, or that might not have happened if Moses didn't have to get his whole family involved, Numbers chapter 25. This is just something that I noticed. So Phinehas, in this chapter, this is Aaron's grandson. He's now involved in ministry. Two people, a Midianitish woman and an Israelite man, came into the tabernacle. There were people. There was a service going on. They were weeping. And when he saw the Midianitish woman and the Israelite man, he stabbed both of them through the stomach in front of all these people. And it does say in verse 9 that the plague, this is Numbers chapter 25, verse 9, the plague was stopped. Verse 8 and verse 9. Verse 8, the plague was stopped. Verse 9, those who died by the plague. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is because in verse 12, God says, yeah, that was a lot for him to do, but I will give him my covenant of peace. So that insinuates to give someone peace, that insinuates that they don't have peace. And to murder two people, and I can imagine that being speared in the stomach with an abdomen, like a shish kebab, I don't imagine that's a quick death. They had to bleed out and like it was gory, and that was in front of all these people. So just the mental state that a person has to be in to do that, even if it was for a righteous cause, it was not instructed by God. And when we look at Numbers chapter 31, they put Phineas, they wanted Phineas to go to war because, since you like stabbing people so much, you're feeling stabby, you need to go to war to avenge Israel from the Israelites. Or is that the right way to say that? It says in the beginning to avenge Israel, okay? My theory on Moses, the reason why God said that he didn't want him, why after Numbers chapter 20, he doesn't want him to lead Israel into Canaan, is because he took things upon himself or used information the wrong way as a leader. I also suspect that Moses acted several times without God commanding him, and this was enough for God to keep him from entering Canaan. So, the book of Deuteronomy, Moses is talking. He's supposed to be summarizing Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers because the audience is the second generation of Israel out of Egypt. This current generation that makes up the audience that he's talking to. These people were either not conceived or they were too young to understand what was going on when the other books were happening. So once their parents died off, now it's going to be Moses is going to die. So he's taking the whole book of Deuteronomy. We're now in Deuteronomy 28. But so far, he's taken this whole book to rehash what's happened. So it's serious when he tells them something and he doesn't tell them the whole truth or he doesn't make things crystal clear because these people have no way of verifying. They can't go to their parents. They have to all rely on what Moses is saying. So the first discrepancy, 24 verse 9. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way as you came out of Egypt. Now, what makes this a disingenuous thing to say is because right now Moses is giving the second generation of Israel all of these laws to help them establish their kingdom once they get into Canaan. Verse 8, Moses is telling them, listen to the Levites about leprosy. Remember what God did to Miriam. This is implying that Miriam disobeyed a priest, and that's why she was struck leprous. That isn't what happened. When we look at Numbers chapter 12, Miriam and Aaron were speaking against Moses' new wife, and that's why she was struck leprous. The second discrepancy that I noticed was Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3. Actually, 3 through 5. Actually, this whole paragraph, 3 through 6. But I'm going to first address 23, verse 3. No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. And he says the reason why neither one of these tribes can enter is because they tried to hire Balaam to curse them. So that's not what happened. When we look at Genesis chapter 22, or not Genesis, Numbers chapter 22, that's when this all happened because we're talking about who attacked or who hired King Balaam to set a curse against Israel. This was Numbers chapter 22. So King Balak saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. I'm going to address them in a minute. But the Moabites said to the elders of Midian. So the Moabites and the Midianites were the ones who were vexing Israel. And how we know the Midianites is because when we look at Numbers chapter 31, they were the ones who God told Moses to avenge Israel against. So when we go back to Numbers 22, you have the Moabites and you have the Midianites. When we look at, so that it's just not true. No Ammonite, no Moabite. So who are the Ammonites? The Ammonites are the inbred result of Lot and his two daughters. If you remember Genesis chapter 19, only three people could be saved from Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was Lot and his two daughters. His two daughters got him drunk, took turns having sex with them, and they produced two inbred tribes. One is the Moabites, two are the Ammonites. The Ammonites did nothing. The Moabites are the ones who vexed Israel. When we look at Numbers chapter 21, the Amorites, these are the people who went against Moses. Sorry. When the Israelites came to ask them, can we pass through your land peacefully? They not only said no, but attacked them. So the Amorites, they are descending from Caanan. So this is Genesis chapter 10. The Amorites, Caanan fathered the Amorites. So I hope I'm being clear. The Amorites are the ones who came to attack in Numbers chapter 21. Those are the descendants of Canaan. They had nothing to do with this curse because when they went against Israel like that, this was before chapter 22. This was before Balaam was hired. So they had nothing to do with that incident. Numbers chapter 22, it starts out saying, Balak saw what had been done to the Amorites. Midian is a descendant of Abraham and his second wife Keturah. So the Midianites, Abraham's lineage, that this lineage or this group of people plus one of Lot's inbred tribes, those are the two that tried to curse Israel. So this isn't a huge, or I mean, it's just starting to get more numerous, all of these discrepancies, because it just isn't true. The Ammonites and the Moabites, those are both Lot's inbred descendants. And so to say they hired against you Balaam, this just isn't true. So the Ammonites and Moabites are both the descendants of Lot. The Midianites, the ones who actually vexed Israel along with the Moabites, that's a descendant of Abraham and Keturah, his second wife. And the Ammonites, which had nothing to do with any of this, is another group of inbreds. So this is just another disingenuous or just not correct information that he's telling this group of Israel. In this same paragraph, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam. Instead, he turned the curse into a blessing. What makes this disingenuous? Because God did talk to Balaam several times. So we look at Numbers chapter 22. God even came to Balaam first and said, who are these men? Because what happened was King Balak, the Moabite king, was terrified of what Israel did to the Amorites. And so to try to curse Israel or to get them away from the area, he tried to hire Balaam. And so he sent messengers to Balaam asking him to come curse Israel. And God came to Balaam because Balaam said, hey, told the messengers, you can stay here for the night. Let me ask God what he thinks. And so before Balaam could go to God, God came to him and said, who are these men? And so God, when you look at Numbers chapter 22, 23, it says God met Balaam. So it's not that, I mean, it just is another discrepancy. Why is Moses not just being honest? We know that he's 120 years old, but there's just too many discrepancies. And there's still some more, so let's move along. But God was instructing an obedient Balaam. The third discrepancy that I see, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 29. Okay, so this is referring to Numbers chapter 13 and 14, when God instructed Israel to take over the promised land the first time, but because of the fear, they didn't. And Moses is exaggerating his role. He says, he's telling them, hey, you murmured, your parents murmured and said the Lord hated us. The cities are great. And I said, do not be in dread or afraid of them. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. That's not what he said. Let's go to what he said. Numbers chapter 13. What actually happened, Moses sent spies to Canaan to check the land. They brought back healthy fruit and detailed how wealthy the land was. So we see this in verse 27. But the men also had what was called an evil report or a bad report. It says the evil report in the King James Version. But what happened was Caleb was the one who quieted the people, not Moses. And then the second time, when we look at in verse 14, they started to complain. Israel started complaining against Moses and Aaron. And they said, let's choose a leader to go back to Egypt with. Joshua and Caleb, those were the ones who was trying to say to them, hey, the land is great. If the Lord delights in us, he'll bring us into the land. Just follow his rules. And the congregation said to stone them with stones. They were going to stone them. God had to come down and protect Joshua and Caleb. Moses was on mute when this was happening. He wasn't saying anything. When God talked to Moses, that's when he started to plead and beg, hey, don't let anything, please, you don't want the Egyptians to see this happen. Everybody knows about the plagues. I kind of think Moses at this point was maybe trying to save his own butt so he can seem like a good leader. I do think there was a little bit of that going on where he wanted to be more than what God told him, but I'm going to get to that as well. But I just wanted you to know that was not what Moses was not the one to stand up and say, no, we don't fear. No, that was Joshua and Caleb. They're the ones that said don't fear. Was not Moses. The next discrepancy, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 37. It's going to be the same thing. Even with me, the Lord was angry on your account and said, you should not go to Canaan. Now, we just saw Numbers chapter 20, why God told Moses directly he wasn't going to Canaan. But you know what? He did this again. Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 26. The Lord was angry with me because of you, and you would not listen to me. Go up to the town of Pisgah, for you shall not go over this Jordan. That's not what happened, Moses. Let's go back and just just remind ourselves, Numbers chapter 20. The reason why God said in verse 12, because you did not believe in me, you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I've given them. That's what happened. It was because of his own doing, not because of what Israel did. So it's just not true. He disobeyed his instruction, and God told him explicitly. And then even in Numbers 27, he refers to it again, just in case you forgot why. I don't want you to forget. It ain't because of what somebody else done, it's because of what you did. Because you rebelled against my word. And then he told him, go on ahead and appoint and anoint Joshua, because he's going to be the leader after you're gone. So it was just not true. When we look at chapter 34, verse 7, sorry, Deuteronomy 34. Moses was 120 years old. It says his eye was undimmed. He was not weak. His strength wasn't gone. So he was still as healthy as he was when he was younger. There was no reason for him to tell these lies. It wasn't like his mind was gone. So that makes this even more egregious that he kept lying. He just lied. He just lied. The first time that I saw Moses do, or that I read Moses do something, and I thought that was questionable because it doesn't seem like that's something God instructed him to do specifically, was in Exodus chapter 32. But the reason why I have Exodus chapter 24 up is because at the end of this chapter, Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So from 24 to 32, Moses was on the mountain. So when we get to chapter 32, the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain. And so they wanted to make a god. They wanted some kind of god while Moses was gone. So they pressured Aaron, who was down there, supposedly there to watch over them. And Aaron instructed them to create a calf. So God told Moses, go down. Moses got so angry with them. So it says in verse 19, Exodus chapter 32, after Moses came down from the mountain and saw that Israel created a calf, he was angry. So in anger, he threw the tablets that God just gave him out of his hands, broke them, and then took the calf that they made, burned it with fire, ground it to powder, and scattered it in the water to make Israel drink it. Didn't seem like that was instructed by God. It just seemed like he took his power as a leader and instituted a punishment instead of going to God and saying, hey, God, like, because we can even look up here. The Lord says, I've seen his people as a stiff neck. Let my wrath burn them so I can consume them. And Moses went to God and said, don't do that. Don't let the Egyptians see that you did that. Remember your promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. And the Lord relented. So then Moses punished them. It just seems questionable because now we're having to rely on Moses, who we know has not been completely honest in Deuteronomy. Just saying. Now we have to rely on him. Because again, when God is saying all this stuff, Moses is credited for writing this book. So we have to believe him now that we look in Deuteronomy, that he's been honest about all of this, that this is what God said to him. He, staved off God's wrath, and then he punishes the people. So after that, he sees them naked because they had, it says broken loose, running wild, out of control. But in King James, it says they were naked, unrestrained. So and to the derision of their enemies. So it's like, I guess other people could see them doing it. So then Moses says, "Who's on the Lord's side?" And then he tells them, God says, "Put your sword on each side of you and kill your brother and his companion and his neighbor." So he told them to just go around killing everyone that you see. Again, God did not instruct this. And I thought that when I saw this. He even says at the end, I can make an atonement. I'm going to go up to the Lord. So then when he went back up to God, God didn't say anything about this. So this just seems strange that he's writing it like this. When we look at his stories in Deuteronomy, how he talked about Miriam and he talked about Balaam, it wasn't exactly how things happen. So we have to just trust that when he's writing this, that he's telling the truth. But it just sounds like it isn't plausible. And when you look at verse 35, God still plagued them. So it didn't even work. Okay. The second questionable event, Exodus 24. Moses sacrificed oxen as peace offerings to God. And we look at 24, verse 8. Come to the Lord and worship. The others can't come near. And then Moses told all the rules that God given him earlier. He wrote them down. And then he created an offering with 12 pillars for each of the tribes of Israel. He took the oxen and he took some blood and he put in the basins. And then he took the book of the covenant and read it. And then to seal the covenant that Israel would understood this, acknowledged this, and would be obedient, he sprinkled them with blood, which I just thought that doesn't sound right. It doesn't, God didn't instruct you to do that. He never instructed you to throw blood on any human. You were supposed to sprinkle blood on the altar, but I don't even know if it said it here yet. Because it just didn't seem right. So, as of today, I've only reached Deuteronomy chapter 28. More information may reveal more details, but these incidents in the Bible might be the causation for God's decision to disinherit Moses with everyone else. Moses wanted to add traditions God didn't command, and it seems like he wanted to manipulate information before he died. The current audience in Deuteronomy is the second generation out of Israel. Again, they were not there for the plagues. They were not there for when they left the Red Sea. And so when the Red Sea was divided and they walked through. So these are the descendants, the children of that generation that left Egypt with Moses. And so for him to not tell them the truth is really essential because they need to know the truth to build their foundation for their kingdom in Canaan. That's all I have. I love you. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I really would like to see some comments of people who maybe you're picking out something that I missed because I'm catching my own things that I'm missing, and I honestly do need help. Thank you for watching. I love you. Have a good day.